What happens when a leader chooses honesty over perfection? In this episode, I'm speaking with Charles Bailey, Headmaster of Worksop College and Ranby House, about how authentic leadership and vulnerability can shape a strong, values-led school culture. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast with me, Juliet Corbett. I'm a trusted advisor, executive coach and strategist, working with accomplished leaders who are navigating complex challenges, the kind that can feel like a tangled ball of string, confusing, frustrating, and hard to unpick. In this new series, I bring you real-world conversations with principals, heads, and CEOs of independent and international schools. Together, we explore problem-solving in uncertainty, staying strategic amidst the daily bustle of leadership, and building high-performing teams. My guest today is Charles Bailey, Headmaster of Worksop College and Ranby House, a thriving independent day and boarding school in Nottinghamshire in the UK. Charles joined the school in April 2025 after 10 years at Harrow School, where he held senior leadership roles, including Director of Studies and Head of Learning Skills. He brings a thoughtful and strategic approach to his leadership, combining a clear vision for the future with a genuine warmth and a belief in the power of community. In our conversation, we talk about what it means to lead with authenticity and vulnerability, and how those qualities can help shape a really healthy, high-performing school culture. We also explore how Charles is navigating complexity in his first year as head, balancing out long-term strategy with the daily realities of school life, and what he's learning about clarity, trust, and belonging along the way. It's a really honest and energising conversation about leadership, culture, and the courage to be real. Enjoy. Hello, Charles, and welcome to the Independent School Podcast. It's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Hi, Juliet, and thank you for inviting me on. It's good to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We have got lots of really interesting topics around leadership, and you and I had a conversation beforehand, and last time we talked, basically we had to actually stop because I realised that what we were talking about was so good, it needed to be part of this official recorded conversation for the podcast. So really looking forward to diving in here. Before we get started onto leadership, could you share with us what is the root of your passion for education? Why have you forged a career in this sector?
It's a question that I think, when you sort of wake up in the middle of the night, you kind of ask yourself that question quite regularly, don't you? How have I found myself in this situation? I think I was one of those maybe slightly odd pupils at sort of the age of 13, 14, who knew he wanted to be a teacher when he was older. And I remember quite vividly friends of mine at school at the time thinking, that's really odd, teachers aren't cool. Why do you want to do this? Why don't you do something else? So I knew from quite an early age I wanted to teach. I made that quite clear to family and friends. I then got to university, and I think as with lots of us at university, you consider other career paths. And I was considering the law and got quite close to forging a legal career. But sort of last minute thought, no, I've really got to scratch this itch. I've really got to try teaching. And the idea was that I'd do teaching for a couple of years and then go into sort of corporate world. And I enjoyed it so much. For me, it was all to do with impact and variety, actually. I think there are very few jobs where you can find yourself in multiple lanes across one day. And schools are incredibly vibrant places. And actually, I'm sure we'll come on to it later on, but one of the challenges as a head is that some of that variety falls by the wayside because you're not with the children as much. So, finding ways to re-energize yourself by getting outside of the office and spending time with young people has been a really helpful method of making sure that you feel energized throughout the day. I definitely wasn't one of those people that fell into teaching. I wanted to be a teacher from a very young age, much to the amusement of my peers.
I think what's really interesting is knowing why you're doing it and that you've been drawn to it then helps you to assess, actually, if something's missing, it's because I'm not with these young people. That was the reason, that was the impact I sought to have in my career. And so it helps you to figure out on the tough days, okay, I've got clients I've spoken to who just said, on a tough day, I just have to go and walk around the playground. Now, I'm not on duty, so I'm not officially needing to be there. I just need to hear the young people, especially kind of at the primary stage, the joy and the excitement and the thrill that they have being with their friends. And that is an instant energy boost to then go back into the office and make the really hard decision that needs to be made.
Yeah, and they give you completely unfiltered opinions.
Yeah.
And I think when you're a leader, sometimes people might tell you what you want to hear. So you might think everything's going really well, but actually with children, they're not afraid to say, "Oh, sir, you got that one wrong," or "Why are we doing this? It seems like a waste of time." And actually, that's the really valuable feedback that you might not always get from your colleagues.
Yeah. We might loop back to that one as well, because that kind of leading a high-performing team and helping them to give you feedback, we can learn something maybe from these young people. Okay, one of the things that strikes me is what you mentioned there is that the career passion that you had to come into teaching and the impact that you wanted to have and the variety is a plus point. It also means that every day schools can often feel like we're firefighting, we're reacting to the daily routines and the unexpected things that happen. And it can mean that the daily work can feel a bit reactive rather than strategic and proactively and coherently driving an organisation, driving the school in the direction you want to strategically take it. How do you balance that sense of I need to react to what's happening each day and I need to proactively be strategic with my time?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm afraid I haven't got all the answers. It's something that I struggle with every day. I think because most of us arrive in headship, not all, but most will arrive in headship from deputy head roles where lots of your work is day-to-day and operational. Speaking of operational, you probably hear a school bell in the background.
Authenticity, I love it.
Oh, there you go. So, and then suddenly you find yourself, in the headmistress's study, and you're required to think strategically.
Yeah.
But of course, you've become required to run the school operationally in the past. So, and I think sometimes because you know how to run a school operationally, there's a temptation to want to share that knowledge or even continue to run a school operationally. I think there's a balance. I think it's unrealistic to say that a head's role is purely strategic, and that we're this idea that we kind of sit in studies, kind of thinking about educational philosophy and what's next. Because I think you want to be an available head. You want to be someone who is happy for people to knock on the door and suddenly, pass a question by you. I think the way that I balance it is I will try and keep some time in my diary to one side, not necessarily for strategic thinking, but for strategic conversations.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as a head, and I've certainly struggled with this, you can get to the end of the day and you've had lots of different conversations. And of course, there are lots of action points, and the conversations aren't worthwhile unless we action them and make some changes. So making sure that you've got some time in your diary, probably once a week, to review your notes and review your action points and then move things forward. For me, typically, I do that on Friday mornings. So I have a 90-minute slot on a Friday morning where I just review action points in the week and then push things forward. I really like working on at the weekend as well. I think that's because I've worked in full boarding schools in the past. So I really like working on weekends. I think it's a time to give yourself a bit of space to think strategically. But I appreciate that that's not for everyone. I think recognizing when you work best as well is really important, and everyone works differently. Some people are like working into the evenings. I like working early in the morning. I find that my thinking is better in the mornings.
Yeah.
So I think it's personal. But as I say, it's the deputy head to the head, that shift. It's a really hard one in terms of mindset.
Yeah. What I love is that what you're describing there is you trying out things and then figuring out what works for you. Like all the productivity advice out there are certain things that are probably worth trying. So the fact that you're blocking 90 minutes with a very specific task, I need to review the actions for the week, anything that slipped through the net. And I imagine that also allows you to see the patterns in a way that if you did it daily, that might be more prompt, but actually the effectiveness of spotting the pattern of, oh, okay, I've got a number of members of the team are constantly missing something, or we're not paying enough attention across the whole week to X or Y or Z. And you can only see the patterns when you're doing it slightly more detached from the actual meetings. So you're trying things that you're finding out are working and then digging in and making them habits.
Exactly. And I think that will probably change over the course of a strategic cycle in a school as well. So Now I find myself coming towards the end of my first year here at Worksop. We're into 1 year of the 5-year strategic cycle. Things are starting to move in the right direction in terms of the strategy, which is great. But I'd say my workflow now is very different to how it was back in sort of March and April time, when you were learning new systems, maybe re-establishing systems or setting up systems for the first time. So, and I think part of it is when you're working in a team, you want your other team members to know how you work. And that takes time, doesn't it? To know, what the expectations of them might be. And I think I've got a responsibility to my team to know what pressures that they're under. And I certainly try and reflect as much as I can on times when I've been in senior teams and not the head, because, when you work with other heads, you recognise their strengths and you try and emulate them. And sometimes I think back to heads with whom I've worked and think, well, what would he or she have done in that situation? And that can be really helpful.
Yeah. And it's that balance, isn't it, of whether that's looking at examples of what you've received in terms of good leadership, or indeed sometimes poor leadership and what you would do differently. It might be for some people who are interested, listen to podcasts, reading management books, leadership kind of content and advice out there. But it's finding what works for you and for your team. And teams, the personalities and the dynamics are going to be different.
Yeah.
And they change over time as people come and go and people grow. So it's a constant kind of reflection process on what is needed.
Yeah. And some advice might say that, people talk about the CEO or the leader has to always be the kind of strong one in a situation and maybe not show much vulnerability. But for me, that's just not realistic. When you're working in a boarding school, you see each other all different times of the day. You're working very closely with one another. I'd like to think that the team here know me at my best, but also probably at my worst as well. And authenticity within the team, I think, is crucial. And actually, through that, you can forge really strong relationships and friendships as well. Yeah,
absolutely. I often think when it's that vulnerability, it's about sharing the processed emotion or the self-awareness to say. So you could say something like, I've had a really busy week. I'm actually feeling a bit frustrated right now. Let's postpone this conversation till this afternoon. And then that means I'm not actually getting frustrated with this person, because that isn't the best way to lead, but it is acknowledging and naming, this isn't the right time for me to have this conversation. I apologise if that inconveniences. When could we reschedule this? And then allowing other people to say the same. My thinking's really all over the place at the moment. This is a Friday afternoon. I'm sure by Monday morning, this is going to feel clearer. Let's come back to it then. So you're naming what can feel a bit vulnerable rather than just expressing it unfiltered to the team, to the people around you, I think.
And I think the phrase in the sector is like toxic positivity. So if someone walks into a head's office every day and says, how's it going? And they say, oh, it's absolutely brilliant, work's going really well. If you're doing that every single day, I think that could be really grating. And it's also completely unrealistic and goes against what we're trying to say to our young people about authenticity. I think it's important to be positive, but kind of realistically positive.
Well, actually, I think that also ties together with my belief, and I have no real evidence, but I've yet had anyone solidly push back. My belief is that every individual team and organisation is trying to do too much. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, starting from assumption of what could we stop doing, or what could we sequence so it comes later in the year, what could we slow, what could we reduce the pace on. Generally speaking, if that toxic positivity is, everything's great, it also comes, it's like the twin of we're doing too much, because at no point is anyone saying, actually, things are not great, I don't think we can do this alongside everything else. And you get that culture of addition where you're just doing more and more and more year on year, and people are exhausted by it.
And I think that's because in teaching, people really care about the projects they work on. Because they can see the benefit for the children. And actually, when I was working at Harrow, full boarding school, for 1 year, basically our strategy was a consolidation exercise. So we invited staff to say, well, what would you get rid of so we can really focus on the core business. It was a great idea, but it was quite tough to implement, because inevitably everyone loves their bit of the school and what they're running, and they see value in it. And I think sometimes, teachers say we want to do less, but when you actually challenge them and say, well, what do you want to take away? They then struggle to let go. But I think you're completely right. Yeah, taking some stuff away and then just focusing on what's core.
Yeah, and of course that passion for education that you and I share, both of us having spent a long time thinking about what is the best way of educating our young people. That passion is a double-edged sword, because it means that people come to work with enthusiasm and positivity and resilience because they've got the passion. But it can also mean it's sometimes hard to stop doing something or to say no to a good idea. And I think that's where the strategy lens comes in. I often say strategy helps you say no to a good idea, in the sense that the quality of the idea is not the decision point. There's also, it has to pass through the strategy lens of, is this the most effective way of getting us to the vision that we've set? And it might be a way to get us there, but not the most effective.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's where performance management and appraisal systems, they've got to fit in with the vision. And an appraisal system that just kind of sits as a document for years to come and doesn't adapt according to a strategic vision is not a good one. I think everyone's got to understand the strategy and the vision. From the head in a school and the governors, all the way down to new teachers and those who've just joined the organisation on the teaching and non-teaching sides. And if a member of staff isn't able to articulate the vision in one pithy sentence, then there's probably an issue. I've said to our guys here that I want you to roll your eyes when I talk about the strategy and the vision and our values. If you're not rolling your eyes, we're probably not saying it enough.
Over communicate.
Exactly.
Always over communicate.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because that creates the filter, the strategic filter of what are we focusing on is then embedded in each person's way of thinking about what we're doing, rather than it needing to be an external check and balance of constantly needing to say no to people. They kind of look for the ideas that fit the strategic vision themselves. And I love the idea that however complicated or complex the strategy development process might be, and there are lots of moving parts to schools, and the sector is not straightforward at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of complexity. Regardless of all of that, what needs to come out the other end of a strategy process is something that's really clear, really simple, so that people can actually remember it and bring it to mind. And so that's where a pithy vision statement, a really clear set of values, can really help people to remember, oh yes, that's the North Star, that's the filter by which we make all the rest of these decisions.
And I worry for parents, because as a parent, particularly a first-time parent, if you're looking for a school for your child, most of our websites say very similar things. Most of our Instagram feeds are very similar. So I said to our staff at the beginning of this year, let's just be confident in what we do. We don't need to be all things to all people. Let's do what we do well and be confident about that, and accept that for some families that's not what they're looking for in their education, and that's okay. But I think given where we're at with the sector and the challenges, the political headwinds, there's a sense that schools just need to kind of fit in with the expectations of all parents. Just to make sure that we continue to have pupils going forward. But actually, I think that can dilute the brand, and it can make you just quite good at lots of things, which is not really where you want to be in the marketplace.
What I find fascinating is that in the rest of the corporate world, that's been known for a very long time. And so that sense of, you need to niche, or niche as they call it, which always makes me laugh slightly, but you need to be focused on what are you doing and who are you doing it for, and what is the real value that you bring that's different to everybody else. So being all things to all people is a disastrous business strategy generally, and that's generally pretty well known. But it is interesting that a lot of schools default to that. It's almost like a surprising truth. It feels, if you haven't done the MBA course, it feels like that would make sense. Let's be all things to all people. But it's very well known and evidence that that isn't the successful route to take. But what interested me as well is that then people, and maybe people who are more well read in the kind of the leadership kind of marketing positioning world, might then say, yes, well, we need a USP, a unique selling point. And I found in my work with schools that schools get really tripped up on that sometimes, because like you say, the unique selling point is really hard. Basically, we are an excellent school. And what makes an excellent school is the same with all of our competitors. So yes, being able to say something different is really helpful, but often the really effective uniqueness is the kind of the point of view or the consistency with which you deliver, which I think is undervalued, or the emotion that you guide families through in terms of their admissions journey and then all the way through the school, that kind of emotional, consistent journey that you create for people, that makes them thrive, that makes them feel safe, that makes them flourish as young people. And I think that sometimes people look for a USP, which is a thing I can point at. But actually, I think the USP needs to be a thing I can feel.
And if you, I completely agree. And if you're too precise with your USP, if that USP then starts to struggle, then you're very open to scrutiny. I think probably if you're trying to identify USPs, yes, as you say, you look for that emotional connection. You look for culture. I think that's really important. But sometimes it's quite hard to convey a culture through marketing, which is why I think even in this digital age, it's so important that families come into the school. I think it's so important that they meet the head, if possible, I think it's really important that the head does the tour as well, because they are buying into a certain kind of leadership. And again, I think, schools just being happy, if the family don't gel with the head or the family don't gel with the school, that's okay, because that's not a reflection on your career progression or the school. It's just that some families are looking for different things. And I think the fit's got to work both ways. But I think, if you're looking for a USP, probably looking for a group of USPs, sort of 2 to 3. Anything more than that, then we fall into the trap that we've just described, where you're trying to be all things to all people. But if you just got one single USP, I think it could be quite risky.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've referenced the complexity and the uncertainty and the kind of political headwinds in the sector. And it's interesting to note that obviously within the UK independent school sector, we're living quite a tumultuous time with regards to tax change, government policy change, and potentially more changes and shifts to come, as well as demographic affordability shifts. In the international sector, there's a lot more geopolitical uncertainty, which then impacts not only on international movement of families and kind of demand cross-border, but also the complexities of having schools in countries where it's not straightforward to actually operate a British education, at least. So the complexity is increasing, the uncertainty. The head isn't always going to have the answers. There's a sense that we can make the best decisions for the next couple of steps. We can learn more, but there is also a sense that I wonder whether schools need to shift from having kind of a 5-year plan, which is quite detailed, to a 5-year direction, but a much more agile process of navigating with complexity and uncertainty. What are your thoughts, having spent kind of a number of months developing this strategy for Worksop and Ranby House, and thinking about how do we balance the planned strategy with the agile nature of what's needed in the environment?
Before I kind of respond to that, I think strategies are really important, but you can't lose sight of the fact that a strategy for a family and a child who are already in the school is not always a great thing to hear about. So, in 5 years' time, we're going to be X, Y, and Z, or in 10 years' time, this is, for some families, it might be their only child. It's their only chance at independent school education. So you've got to almost decide what's the 5-year strategy and start drip feeding some of those changes into the day-to-day running of the school right from the very start. Not lose focus of the fact that for some children, this is their only chance of going through your school.
Yeah, really good point.
I think there are always going to be challenges. It's cliched, but looking for opportunity in the challenges. To give you an anecdote, last term, we were in a situation where the main transformer on the school site, we're here at 350 acres here at Worksop, so this transformer is very important for us. It stopped working one evening. All of our boarders were here. We phoned up the National Grid, thinking, they'll be able to sort it. They were very clear that was our responsibility, and it wasn't for them to fix. So we were in a situation where we had to fix this transformer. We couldn't fix it. So we had to close the school the next day. So I emailed all the parents at midnight on a Thursday night, and the school was closed on the Friday. We moved all our boarders into a different building. And that's not a nice thing to have to do, to close a school for the day. But actually, and it was during public exam season, of course. But what we ended up doing was we said for pupils, particularly those who have families who wouldn't be able to watch their children at school, do come in, and we would do a series of different events and activities outdoors, which we did. It was actually an amazing day, really fun day. We couldn't use our catering facility, so we did a kind of big barbecue outside, an amazing atmosphere. I felt that the community was a lot stronger as a result of that difficulty. And I think, one of the things about the situation in the independent school sector at the moment is that the respective stakeholders have got a lot closer together. So, our old Worksopian, old Ranbyan community are much more engaged with their old school than they probably were in the past, because they recognise that it's a challenging time to be in a school. Our parents are very much on our side. They really care about the future of the school and the school's security. And governors, from being a governor where perhaps you're that critical friend, but you're not heavily involved in the running of a school or the executive running of the school, governors are now having to work extremely hard. So I think one of the benefits is that it strengthened a community. And I don't think that would have happened had these political headwinds not been in place. I think we saw it during the pandemic as well, the strength of community when there are challenges. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's an easy time, but there are lots of positives that we've identified. Going back to talking about sort of high functioning teams as well, I think senior teams in schools, there's a strength that binds you together. There are quite humorous moments as well where you think, this is really challenging, this is tough, but let's just get on with it. And no, it's been positive overall. And I say the sector has been incredibly generous with one another. So a kind of sharing culture now that perhaps didn't exist across the sector. What's your policy for X, or could my colleague come down to your school and see how you operate with Y? That in my view, that wasn't really something that was commonplace up until a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So the strands that come through that are really important. So we've got that kind of positivity that you mentioned earlier, looking for the opportunity and the challenge. And I'm pretty confident in saying that there was no management training course that you did that was how to fix a transformer when it goes wrong. Yeah, okay. Yes. But what you were able to do was to use that opportunity that challenge presented to then enhance the community. And so that importance of, I'm kind of have a love-hate relationship with the phrase stakeholders, but actually, because it feels a bit kind of corporately, but actually we're talking about community, and this is what schools do so well, is they automatically are community. And so all of these kind of tech startup companies that are trying to create community with their customers, like, you're kind of late to the game, guys. Like, this is what we've been doing forever in education. So the community is what's binding together. And I think that includes the community, the culture within the senior team, the community and the culture between schools. And also it's that sense that that can be your USP, like the bondedness, the cohesion, the togetherness that you bring as a school. You might need a couple of other things as well, but people need to feel that when they walk on site, or when they're meeting the head, doing the tour.
One of our strands of our strategic vision at the moment is heritage. We call it heritage, and it's all to do with celebrating the history of the school and the traditions in the school. And of course, independent schools have made mistakes with traditions, and some traditions are not positive ones. But we feel really strongly that we want our pupils and our whole community to appreciate that they're in a school for a very short time. The school is bigger than any of us. We're custodians of this historic site for a short time. So we've made a number of significant changes. I mean, our ante-hall, as you walk into the school, we now have images of the school throughout its history, right back to its inception, all the way through to when girls first arrived in the school, and then more modern day images, just so that our pupils understand that this school has been here a long time, and you should be proud of this place, creating that sense of belonging. We also, over a number of years, lost some of the nomenclature that you might associate with sort of big public schools in the UK, and we're really keen that that comes back, because again, that uniqueness is something that binds you together. And you know, when you have those alumni events, and you might not know the person that was at the school in the 1970s, 1980s, but actually the fact that you've had a common experience is really, really powerful. So we're really kind of focusing in on trying not to homogenize the school experience for young people. Just say that Worksop is a bit different and it's unique, and some of it's a bit bizarre, but that's good. And that diversity is really important. So and as you say, community is central to that.
So it's that community through time as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So some of those alumni may still be alive and they're coming back physically into the community for events and so on, but actually it's a connection back through time to all of those alumni who have passed as well. It's a continuation of belonging in a way that we can define, which is much bigger than just the people who surround me day to day. Interesting. So it's interesting that you mentioned a little while ago about the strategy is important, but and you mentioned culture as part of that. And of course, there's the kind of the famous debate about strategy versus culture. You know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's all about the culture, as some people would say. So I'm writing a book at the moment. I'm kind of experimenting with different ideas around how really accomplished leaders can lead through uncertainty and complexity. And what I've realised as I'm drafting out this book is that I'm a strategist. I've always loved strategy, but actually I'm using the word strategy less and less, because it's about being strategic. But actually, often what I'm actually talking about is having the courage to lead, making bold decisions when the stakes are high, having the clarity to see what matters and what doesn't, leading sustainably so that both the kind of the head, but also all of the rest of the staff can feel like they're energized and they've got the resources they need each day to be making great decisions daily. So I think you're right that all of those things are strategic, but it's not about the strategic plan. It's not even about the strategic planning process. It's something which is much more intangible about being strategic. Is that articulate what you're feeling as well? Or
I mean,
words in your mouth?
No, I think you're completely right. And, you know, it's a common phrase, but, you know, you want to get out of the weeds. And I think as teachers, because I think we're all, without going into sort of personality types, we all like things a certain way. And we're used to our way of doing things. And sometimes it's being happy to challenging those ideas you might have yourself. And I think we can find ourselves being dragged into the weeds, and it's just trying to identify those moments. And also thinking that, you know, if I don't get that job done today, but instead I've managed to be strategic, actually it doesn't matter. That long term, that's going to have a more positive effect. And I think it's hard, isn't it? Because in schools, lots of people have very specific jobs. Bar, you know, when you look at heads and other senior leaders, you know, you're employed to be a teacher of maths. So, you know, your lane is teaching maths. And just trying to encourage middle and middle leaders and teachers and non-teachers to perhaps think about how they can impact the strategy. So as I said earlier, we're thinking about performance management at the moment, and also how that also links to how we look at our benefits package in schools, and really focusing on impact. So how is your job day to day impacting the strategic direction of the school? So it's not just about your teaching of maths to Key Stage 4. How is your teaching of maths to Key Stage 4 having an impact on the future of Worksop College and Ranby House? And that's a big question, but I think it's a good one to pose to staff, because suddenly they're seeing themselves as a really significant cog in a broader strategic wheel.
So it invites them to take themselves out of the weeds now, and what they are doing is, to say it's weeds is derogatory, but what they're doing is operationally critical every single day in those classrooms. That's what actually transforms the lives of the young people in our care. But actually it's to help them to lift their eyes up and to see the connection of excellent teaching practice, and this is how it connects to what we're, as a community, what we're trying to create, what we're trying to do, and see the impact that we're having on a bigger scale.
And shifting your... There are times when you need to show a lot of attention to detail, and there are times when you don't need to show a lot of attention to detail, and it's deciding when you're going to be using that part of your brain. So every school will go through a policy review at some point. That's the time to be using those skills of attention to detail. But there are other times where actually thinking more strategically, and I'm not suggesting that the two aren't mutually exclusive, but it's sometimes just knowing that you don't need to spend, nth number of hours on that task when you could be doing something else.
Yeah. And that's what I would call a polarity. There's no like right one place to be on that. So it's about it's about knowing that spectrum is there. Yeah. How detailed versus how big picture do I want to be? And it's also about communication. How detailed do I want my communication to be, or how big picture do I want to be? And then it's intentionally placing myself on that polarity from one to the other, depending on the audience, the situation, the impact I need to have with this audience. And I sometimes find that leaders who go to the detailed side, where they're trying to communicate strategy, don't bring everyone with them, because no one quite knows what they're saying, because they're going to all the detail that they've been thinking through. Actually, that's when you want to move more to that more big picture end of the thing, the spectrum, communicate where we're going and how we're going to get there.
Yeah,
and people can ask questions. Detail. So
I think some of it's also role modeling as well, and I think being precise and showing attention to detail definitely has its place. And I think the other thing I'd say is being quite flexible with who you appoint into different positions in your leadership team. So I think in independent schools now you might have a head or a CEO, you have senior deputy head pastoral, academic, etc. And I think that paradigm should be challenged. So actually, well, what does my school need at that moment in time? Where are areas where perhaps we need more leadership focus, and then appoint a colleague into that position as you see fit, not just looking at what other schools do and replicating that. And similarly, not being afraid to maybe promote colleagues within a school to a senior position, where in another school that might not attract that same level of seniority. And I think part of that is looking at seconding colleagues onto senior leadership teams, asking colleagues to run certain projects, to report back to the leadership team as well. Just not being too rigid in your thinking about what the team looks like.
Yeah, I think thinking about high performing teams, that's really important, because the team itself needs to be agile and the skill sets you need. So that's secondment, or I sometimes call them stretch projects. So you give, so this can work for middle leadership as well. A stretch project where you might take a few hours of teaching off somebody for 1 year. They want to be really embedded into a particular thing that's of interest to them, which is what the school needs, and it develops them. It's the career development that can also be useful when there isn't an obvious hierarchical place for them to be promoted into, to help them to grow and be committed and to feel like they are being mentored and really growing in the school. And actually that loops back to one of the comments you made at the beginning, that kind of high performing team. The beauty of working with young people, especially when they're slightly younger down the school, maybe, is they don't have that filter. They will just tell you what you think. Hopefully that doesn't go away too much in the older year groups. But maybe it's a little bit, I don't like your shoes, sir. May not be what they're saying, but I think it's creating that culture within the whole staff as well. The ability to speak truth to power, but to do it in a constructive way that actually contributes to the belonging, to the sense of coherence that you have as a team. Do you have any lessons that you've learned along the way about how to create that openness in your senior team, for example?
I'm very. I've got to say, I'm very fortunate at Worksop. So I come into a school where it is a great senior team, very well established, high levels of expertise. I'd say that I feel that I've been quite vulnerable with them. It's my first time as a head. I haven't shied away from that. I think it's knowing the expertise of the team around you, and not being afraid to say, look, have we tried this before? Why didn't it work? Okay, fine. We're gonna park that idea. I think it's about knowing the personalities of your team pretty intimately, and knowing that, not to say that you're a different person to the different people whom you manage, but just knowing their interests, knowing their own career journey, knowing what they want to do in the future, and challenging them, but also helping them along their way. I mean, we talk a lot about leadership strategy and what it means to be a leader. I think within our team, we talk a lot about how we manage our time. We talk a lot about our line management duties, about middle management and the interaction between middle management and senior management. So I think we're not afraid to kind of just challenge the efficiency of how we're doing things. And I think we're just very open and honest with each other. But as I say, I don't think that's through work that I've done. I think that's because I'm surrounded by some very open-minded, talented leaders. The challenge, and this is a very selfish challenge, is how do you keep really good people? I've got a great team at the moment. I want them to stay, but of course, as their manager, I should be helping them. Perhaps if they want to move to a different school or a different sector, help them with that journey as well. So that's the only thing that kind of is in my mind. But I think that's a good problem to have.
It's a very good problem to have. Yeah, absolutely.
I think your point around pupils is a great one. Actually, 2 points in my week that are kind of sacrosanct, and I won't compromise on them. Are on Tuesdays I go running with the sort of cross country team, and I do that because it's nice to spend time with the pupils. We've got amazing surroundings around us as well, but also because I normally run with one other boy or girl, and I have a conversation with them when we're running, and invariably it drifts onto what we're doing at the school and what we think about the school. So we're a Christian faith school. Yesterday I was having a conversation with a boy who's not Christian, and was asking him about how he felt about our chapel culture, how we could provide for those who aren't Christian. And it was a great conversation that in some ways is easier to have when you're running side by side than if you had organised a meeting and we're chatting it through. And the other time that again is a non-negotiable is meeting with what we call our captains of school. We do that every Friday. We're considering our use of technology and mobile phones at the moment. And again, their feedback is so invaluable. And they're not afraid to give me the unfiltered truth. But because they're now 17, 18, they're in positions of responsibility themselves, I think we can both learn from one another, because they are going to be, in a few years' time, in similar situations professionally, where they're going to have to offer their advice, and that they're going to be hopefully well set to do that.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, I'm super impressed that you can have a run and a conversation at the same time, because I couldn't do that. So well done. But yeah, absolutely. There's that pattern of openness, inviting other points of view, and the reflective process as well. So as a group, as a leadership group, when you're reflecting on leadership approach, time management, and what that might look like for other parts of the school as well, that is basically a group reflection process, which is obviously working really well to identify where individuals can improve and shift and change, but as well as sharing ideas of different things that we could try. So fantastic. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end. If you had to pick a couple of kind of lessons that you want people to take away with around leaderships, either generic or within schools specifically, what feels important to you from this conversation that you want people to really hold in their mind?
It's a great question. Lots of things come to mind. I think it's vulnerability. I think, we are working in a difficult sector, lots of pressures on us. People will find out what kind of person you are. So sort of don't hide it from the start. I think be vulnerable, be true to yourself, be principled. Apologize when you get things wrong. You're going to get things wrong on a daily basis, and take responsibility for those, and sometimes take responsibility for others' mistakes as well. I think that's part of being a leader. Just being vulnerable and being authentic, I think.
Yeah. Great advice. Thank you so much, Charles, for your time today.
Thank you, Juliet.
Wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Independent School Podcast. If you found today's conversation valuable, I invite you to join my email list and hear more of my fresh thinking on leading strategically through complexity and uncertainty. Visit www.consultjuliet.co.uk/sign up. Remember, the biggest challenges you face are rarely solved by working harder. They're solved by thinking differently, with the right trusted advisor in your corner. While I work with leaders across many sectors, my heart and more than 2 decades of experience remain deeply rooted in education. If you're ready to turn complexity into progress, sharpen your focus, and lead a happier, higher performing team, I'd love to start a conversation about how we could work together. Just reach out anytime. And don't forget, the clearest insights often appear when you gift yourself a moment to slow down and let your best thinking surface.